Welcome to the FDA QRC 2019 Medical Device Update. This session is being provided as a recorded learning. You may request a certificate of completion using the instructions located on the last slide. We are pleased to provide technical content to the industry, and should you have any questions, please reach out using the contact information provided at the end. I am Sarah Bronstead, and I am one of the project managers at FDA QRC. I am a QA professional with 15 years of GLP, GCP, and ISO experience in both preclinical and clinical studies with a main focus in medical devices. I am a registered quality assurance professional in both GCP and GLP through the Society of Quality Assurance. I started my career as a histology technician working on preclinical medical device studies and then transitioned into a clinical research role at a gastroenterology practice. My QA career began managing a group of quality assurance specialists with a focus on GLP toxicology, efficacy, and stability studies, in addition to GCP studies. I then transitioned to a medical device preclinical CRO, overseeing all process improvement efforts for the entire company, leading internal process audits, and hosting ISO 17025 and FDA inspections. Prior to joining FDA QRC, I held a clinical compliance and quality role at one of the largest medical device companies, supporting clinical study teams in ensuring compliance to applicable regulations throughout the entire clinical study lifecycle. In this presentation, we will discuss current updates such as EU MDR 2017-745 and its implementation, ISO 14971 2019, ISO 14155 2020, some common medical device observations from regulatory authorities, and finally some trends in the regulations. The European Union Medical Device Regulation, otherwise known as EU MDR, was published in 2017 with an implementation period. EU MDR is the replacement for the Medical Device Directive, MDD. Effective entities such as manufacturers of medical devices, authorized representatives of medical devices, importers or distributors of medical devices, or regulatory affairs or quality management professionals working in the field of medical devices need to understand the implications of these changes and how to comply. EU MDR is required to affix the CE marks to devices. There are no grandfathering of products, and companies using contract manufacturers or partner companies for delivery devices and companion diagnostics, such as guide wires and catheters, need to ensure suppliers are also prepared for EU MDR. EU MDR was published in the Official Journal of the European Union on May 5, 2017, and entered into force on May 26, 2017. Entry into force is not the same as being applicable. The existing medical device directive is applicable throughout the transition period. The key upcoming date is May 26, 2020, which is the date of application of the EU MDR. Prior to this date, there have been some concerns expressed by the US to the European Union. In July 2019, the US asked the European Union to delay implementing the EU MDR by 3 years due to the lack of approved notified bodies. Minimally, the US asked the European Union to allow for legacy products that are currently deemed safe to be sold on the market until 2024, and for notified bodies to prioritize devices that need new certification over those being recertified. Another concern specified by the US was that the European Union has drafted an insufficient number of the implementing acts needed to provide details about how the industry can ensure products comply with new standards. In response, The European Union issued an amendment for makers of reusable Class 1 medical devices and Class 1 software that will extend the time for them to comply with the new rules. 3 different groups of medical devices in the Class 1 category will get an additional 4 years to come into compliance. The 3 groups are reusable surgical instruments, those in sterile conditions, or those that have a measure function. Those devices can remain or be placed on the market until May 26, 2024. Next, we will be discussing the overview of changes from Medical Device Directive to EU MDR. Specifically, there will be 7 key areas that we will touch upon. The first being post-market surveillance, or PMS. Notified bodies will be playing a bigger role in supervising the manufacturer's PMS system. For example, a PMS report or periodic safety update report will be required depending on device class. A unique device identification, UDI, is also a new requirement for Europe. It is already an established requirement in the United States, and the EU system intends to align with the US. That being said, there will be a separate EU UDI database. Economic operators will also be affected by EU MDR. There will be established practices required for European importers and distributors of medical devices within EU MDR. There is also a requirement for a person assigned to ensuring regulatory compliance. This person is often the quality or regulatory compliance individual or a safety manager. Both the manufacturer and the authorized representative have to appoint this person for their own entity. This person must have formal qualifications with at least 2 years of experience. If they do not have any formal qualifications, they need to have at least 5 years of previous experience. Another change is around the extension of scope to products without an intended medical purpose. This is analogous to devices with a medical purpose. This is aimed at medical device-like products, typically intended for cosmetic purposes. An example of this would be colored, non-corrective contact lenses. Another change is around clinical investigations, and this can be located in an annex. This contains information to be considered in the clinical investigational application, an investigator brochure, a clinical investigation plan. This is around sponsor obligations, and the clinical investigational report. This is far less specific than either ISO 14155 or ICH GCP. The final change that we're going to discuss is around risk management. Each device must have a documented risk management plan. The requirements are very similar to ISO 14971, which means ISO 14971 will be the new minimum standard for device risk management under EU MDR. There are many areas to consider when coming into compliance with EU MDR. There needs to be a decision on the intended use and classification of the device. This is going to be the responsibility of the manufacturer. To demonstrate compliance to this requirement, there needs to be a rationale for the classification of the product, along with a statement of intended purpose and users. Processes need to be established along with implementing enough resources to meet all requirements. This includes having the correct number of people in place, having policies and procedures that comply with EU MDR, and having the resources to meet all the requirements. Risks need to be minimized and safety and performance requirements fulfilled. This includes having a risk management file, a general requirements checklist, labeling and instructions for use or IFU for your device, and also a post-market surveillance plan. Another requirement that is needed to comply with EU MDR is clinical evaluation. This will include having a clinical evaluation plan and report, along with clinical investigation documentation, and again, a post-market clinical follow-up plan. There also needs to be technical documentation, and this documentation should demonstrate how the device conforms to technical requirements, how it will achieve its intended purpose, that it's safe, and proper processes were followed to generate the data. Another area is around distribution, which includes having agreements with representatives, importers, and/or distributors, as applicable. There is a requirement for registration of the device and the manufacturer. This requires uploading information to modules of the EUDAMED, which is the European Database on Medical Devices. There is a requirement around conformity assessments. So any notified body can be chosen by the manufacturer if they have the necessary capabilities for that particular device. Typically, a European Union Quality Management System certificate or EU type examination certificate is used for demonstration of compliance. For administrative procedures, finalization of the EU Declaration of Conformity and registration of the device allows for the device to be imported, marketed, distributed, and supplied for use and used within the European Union. And finally, ongoing obligations. These obligations include maintaining the risk management system, executing the post-market clinical follow-up activities, and keeping technical documents up to date. As of February 14th, 2020, this is the list of notified bodies designated under EU MDR 2017. So there are currently, as of February 14th, 11 notified bodies that have been designated. A notified body within the European Union is an entity designated by the EU competent authority to assess the conformity of medical devices before being placed on the market. Companies are free to choose the notified body they engage with. The notified body must be designated to carry out the conformity assessment procedure for the particular medical device type or types for which the certification is sought. This is the area of major concern for companies as the transition date approaches, because of the small number of notified bodies designated under the new regulation. The number of approved notified bodies above is not foreseen to be enough to handle all the new regulatory approvals needed. The ISO standard 14971, which is the application of risk management to medical devices, was updated to its third edition in 2019. The purpose of the update was to provide clearer guidance and greater detail in the application of risk management concepts. It was not ISO's intent that the revision rework the risk management process, but instead aimed at clarifying the risk analysis process and specific steps device manufacturers must take. Another goal of the revision was to make it easier to update the standards guidance in the future without going through the entire process of changing it. The intent behind risk management is to identify, evaluate, analyze, assess, and mitigate potential product issues. It is a total product lifecycle process. It should be viewed as a tool to help design, develop, and manufacture safer medical devices, not a checkbox activity. It is an expectation that a company manage risk throughout the entire product lifecycle and throughout the entire QMS. ISO 14971 and ISO 13485 are related because they work together to create a QMS that is functional and addresses risk. ISO 13485 is focused on regulatory and customer requirements for medical devices. ISO 13485 also requires risk analysis and record keeping pertaining to any risk. In this area, ISO 1345 looks to ISO 14971 for guidance. ISO 14971 is more detailed when it comes to risk management requirements. Companies should perform a gap analysis between the new and old versions of ISO 14971, identify areas to address, and update processes and procedures as needed to comply. The updated ISO 14971 standard was published in December of 2019. There is a target publication date of May 2020 for its accompanying technical report 24971, which is the guidance on the application of the standard 14971. Informative annexes will primarily reside in this technical report because it's easier to update a technical report than the entire standard. Technical Report 24971 is a necessary supplement which contains guidance on hazard identification, risk concepts and techniques, risk management for in vitro diagnostic devices, and risk management plans. There are 6 risk management process steps included in the ISO 14971 standard. The risk management plan outlines all risk management activities to be conducted over a medical device's lifecycle, including risk acceptability. This document is dynamic and should be revisited and updated often. The standard provides a framework for a risk management plan. When developing or reviewing a risk management plan, the plan must define the risk management activities and which products are included, state the intended use of the products, describe all the risk management plans throughout the product lifecycle, describe the roles and responsibilities of personnel, define criteria for the product's risk acceptability, state the definition of methods to verify that the risk control measures are implemented and work, and finally, describe how post-production information will be captured and fed into the risk management activities. Risk assessment includes risk analysis and risk evaluation. Risk analysis includes the documentation of a medical device's intended use. Risk evaluation includes assessment of risk using criteria for acceptability. Risk control is the reduction of risk to an acceptable levels. Examples of this include designing the device to be inherently safe, ensuring that hazardous situations can't occur, or implementing protective measures. The evaluation of overall residual risk includes analyzing the contributions of all individual risks to ensure several small risks do not create an unexpected larger risk. The risk management review is the review of the risk management plan to ensure it was properly executed and documented and that the residual risk is acceptable. Production and post-production activities. There are 4 steps that should be included in these activities. The establishment of systems to collect and review information from production and post-market activities. The collection of relevant information for the device. The review of the information to determine relevance to device safety. And finally, implementation actions. And these can be done by reviewing the risk management file to determine if new risks or previously identified risks need to be assessed or reassessed. So as you can see, an ongoing theme is not only to do these steps, but then to make sure that you're going back and reassessing, revising documents, updating documents, to continue to show that you are managing risk. Now we're going to discuss the changes from the previous version of the 14971 standard, which was published back in 2007. Section 2 was updated, and Section 2 is normative references. So normative references are an informative, mandatory element. A clause on normative references has been included to respect requirements in Clause 15 of the ISO IEC Directives, Part 2 of 2018. Section 3, Terms and Definitions, has been updated. Defined terms were updated, and some others have been introduced. New terms that are included in the updated standard include benefit, which is a counterpart to the existing definition of risk, state-of-the-art, and finally, reasonably foreseeable misuse. Reasonably foreseeable misuse is defined as any improper use arising from readily predictable human behavior, according to the standard, and may or may not be intentional. Section 4, which is the Risk Management Plan, has an addition that states a method to evaluate the overall risk, and the criteria for acceptability of the overall risk shall be included. Section 5.2, the intended use and reasonably foreseeable misuse, has a clarification of the requirement to document reasonably foreseeable misuse. This goes beyond user error, requiring manufacturers to consider a broader range of risks. For example, orthopedic manufacturers developing smart implants must consider the cybersecurity implications of connected devices in patients. Anything with embedded software must be robust and secure, where reasonably foreseeable misuse can result in high impact risks. Section 5.4, the identification of hazards and hazardous situations, had an addition of a requirement for hazardous situations to be considered and documented. It is now required for manufacturers to address reasonably foreseeable combinations of events that can create hazardous situations. Hazard is defined as a potential source of harm, and some examples can include chemical hazards, electric energy, mechanical energy, thermal hazards, biological hazards, etc. And hazardous situation is defined as a circumstance in which people, property, or the environment are exposed to one or more hazards. There are a number of additional sections listed here that include clarifications and updates to notes within those sections. One section we're going to touch on is 7.4, which is the benefit risk analysis. This section has strengthened language around benefit risk analysis, reflecting a growing area of attention by regulatory bodies in evaluating compliance. Monitoring benefits is also important for post-production activities to determine whether the benefit-risk balance changes over time to adjust the risk management process accordingly. According to the new technical report 24971, which will be published in May 2020, manufacturers should look for changes during post-production activities to inform benefit risk analysis, including more or fewer patient benefits as revealed by clinical data, changes in medical practices, patient population changes, and introduction of new devices with risks and benefits. Section 8, Evaluation of Overall Residual Risk, has an addition of disclosure for residual risk statement. The standard requires manufacturers to describe the method for evaluating overall residual risk, define criteria for acceptability of individual risks and overall residual risk, perform a benefit risk analysis on individual residual risks not meeting the criteria as well as on the overall residual risk, and to implement processes to continuously update risk management documentation, including with production and post-production data. It's important to note that when evaluating risk, accepting too many small risks can constitute one big risk. Section 9, Risk Management Review. This has an addition stating manufacturers shall determine when subsequent reviews of the risk management plan's execution needs to be performed and when the risk management report needs to be updated. Section 10.2, Information Collection. There's a clarification of the requirement to review for possible relevance to safety and includes changes in general state of the art. The subclause on information collection requires companies to collect production and monitoring data, user-generated data, data originating from installation, use, and maintenance, supply chain data, and data related to the state of the art, such as new standards, data, or alternative devices. Section 10.3, which is Information Review, separates actions into particular medical devices and risk processes. There is an addition of consideration of devices already on the market. The Information Review subclause relates to ongoing monitoring and requires manufacturers to consider the information they collect when the state of the art changes. The updated ISO 14971 also has changes to the annexes. Annex A is the rationale for the requirements. Annex B, which is the risk management processes for medical devices, provides detailed correspondence between the 2007 version and the 2019 version, including a graphic reflecting the changes. I would highly suggest any organization that's looking to transition to the new standard review Annex B to be able to complete their gap analysis effectively. Annex C, Fundamental Risk Concepts, includes a graphic that depicts the relationships of hazard, sequence of events, hazardous situation, and harm that was previously in Annex E.1. The ISO standard 14155, Clinical Investigation of Medical Devices for Subjects, Good Clinical Practices, is set to be updated in the summer of 2020 to its third edition. The new standard introduces clarifications to facilitate compliance to other international standards, including ICH GCP. It has broader risk management requirements across all stages of clinical investigations, from pivotal to post-market clinical follow-up. The primary change will be to apply the principles of medical device risk management required by the ISO 14971, which we had just discussed, to all clinical investigations. It is important for companies to do a gap analysis and assess the areas that need to be revised or added to the processes and procedures due to this update. The final draft international standard for ISO 14155-2020 is currently out for review and vote as of February 5th, 2020. Voting will terminate on April 1st with a planned publication date of June 17th. Manufacturers must clinically evaluate medical devices before they can be placed on the market. To do so, clinical data must be examined in order to investigate whether the medical device is safe and performing. ISO 14155, along with Medical Device Directives, local laws, and EU MDR, is necessary to gather credible data during the clinical investigations. There are several changes from the previous version of ISO 14155, which was published back in 2011. Section 4 is a summary of good clinical practice principles. So there is an inclusion of a summary section of GCP principles. Some examples of GCP principles would be that the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects are the most important considerations and prevail over the interests of science and society. And also that clinical investigations shall be sound and described clearly in the CIP. So really this section gives everyone a good base of GCP principles to build their clinical studies around. Section 5.4, registration and a publicly accessible database. So this section references the registration of the clinical investigation in a publicly accessible database in accordance with the Declaration of Helsinki. For example, this would include listing the clinical investigation on a database such as clinicaltrials.gov. Section 6.7, which is the monitoring plan, has an inclusion of risk-based monitoring, specifically that the sponsor shall determine the extent and nature of monitoring based on the risk assessment. This requires that the results of the risk assessment be used to develop a risk-based monitoring plan and a supporting rationale. Section 9.1, clinical quality management. This has an inclusion of guidance with regards to clinical quality management, specifically to ensure that the clinical investigation is designed, conducted, and monitored, and that the data generated, documented, recorded, evaluated, and reported is in compliance with the standard, the clinical investigation plan, and any subsequent amendments, along with any applicable standards or regulatory requirements. Several annexes have also been updated or changed from the previous version of the ISO 14155 standard. Annex A, which is Clinical Investigation Plan, is a normative annex and includes guidance of statistical considerations. Annex G, EC, so Ethics Committee Responsibilities, is an informative annex, and it has an inclusion of guidance for ethics committees. Annex H, this is the application of that ISO 14971 standard to clinical investigations. It is also an informative annex, and it reinforces the thought of risk management through the process of the clinical investigation. So planning to results. So when you first start out planning your study, to the CIP, to the monitoring, all the way to your report. Annex I, clinical development stages. Again, an informative annex. Provides clarification of applicability of the requirements of the standard to the different clinical development stages. Finally, Annex J, clinical investigation audits. This is also an informative annex that has inclusion of guidance on clinical investigation audits of sponsor, clinical investigator, and investigation site practices and procedures. Now we're going to discuss some common observations that have been noted recently by regulatory authority in the area of medical devices. The first topic, risk management, is noteworthy because several regulations and standards have been updated to include risk management or update and elaborate on risk management requirements. So several areas have been a theme under the risk management heading, one being incomplete and inadequate documentation. So for example, there was an observation that noted that despite the fact that inadequate product packaging was a life-threatening infection risk, the manufacturer left this field blank on the input-output risk table. Another area, failure to complete both product and contamination risk assessment. Inspectors observed vermin, such as bird and insects, in the facility near open equipment used for manufacturing. Failure to reduce risks as far as possible. So a surgeon implanted a stem that was wrongly sized because there was no tool available to determine the size needed. This resulted in an unstable implant. X-ray templates were provided for every other implant size. It is not reasonable not to provide templates for each size. An economic impact should not be considered if this can reduce risk. Failure to establish risk control measures. Some examples of risk control measures can be extendable tools to eliminate work height, substituting a hazardous chemical with a safer alternative, enclosing dangerous items of machinery or moving parts, or personal protective equipment. Lack of complete or accurate risk-benefit analysis. So there must be documentation, and you have to provide evidence and rationale for all risks. The type of benefit, magnitude of benefit, medical device-related deaths and serious injuries, and non-serious adverse events must be included. A lack of risk management and design control processes is another common observation. Over-reliance on failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA. This is a detriment of ISO and compliance regulations. So FMEA is a step-by-step approach for identifying all possible failures in a design, manufacturing, or assembly process, or a product or service. ISO states that risk management is a systemic application of policies, procedures, and practices to the tasks of analyzing, evaluating, controlling, and monitoring risks. You must consider the comprehensive use of devices, whether that use is correct or incorrect. You cannot just rely on FMEA. And finally, treating risk management as a checkbox instead of a cultural objective. So it shouldn't be looked at as, yep, I did it. I didn't really think of all the things I needed to think about or take everything into consideration. We just did the bare minimum. It should be part of the culture of the company that we are trying to do the best we can in the area of risk management. Another common observation that we see over and over again is staff training. So employees are not being trained in a particular area that they are responsible for, or there's a lack of training program, or a lack of training documentation. A lot of companies rely on read and understanding training, but you have to question, are the staff truly reading it? Do they truly understand the intent of the procedure? Is a train-by-trainer training needed instead? Someone sitting down with them, discussing the policy, showing them what that means in real life. Another common observation is around CAPA, so corrective action, preventative action. A lot of times there's an inadequate or inconsistent CAPA. So for example, after discovering a defective input, only a small portion of products were tested and any non-tested products were assumed non-defective. Or a company tested only products with visible defects after receiving complaints, and products that didn't have visible defects were shipped, leading to a product recall. Another area around CAPA is the documentation or data analysis breakdown of CAPA. So either there's a failure to analyze complaints or nonconformances to discover systemic issues, or closing in CAPA investigations early, or failing to validate and document the corrective action. So not taking credit for what you have done. Another observation around complaint procedures. So failure to take appropriate action on customer complaints. Were complaints reported, and were they reported in an adequate time frame? Mandatory reporters include manufacturers, importers, and device user facilities, such as hospitals or surgical facilities. So for example, if a patient states their medical device malfunctioned to a medical device company employee that they see on the street, maybe that person's wearing a company jacket or has a company backpack, and so a patient walks up to them and say, hey, your company's product malfunctioned. It's that employee's responsibility to identify the person at their company that complaint needs to go to so that it gets reported in a timely manner. Data integrity is another very common observation that's cited by regulatory authorities. It is one of the most important concepts in device manufacturing and one of the top cited items on warning letters. Some examples of data integrity issue is a lack of audit trails in software systems, no unique user names or passwords, or a failure to control against emission of data. And finally, quality management system QMS breakdowns. So transparency is key to manage and monitor product quality through the device life cycle. So it's very important to have a consistent CAPA and a complaint handling system that works and that data integrity procedures are in place. There are several current trends in regards to medical device regulations, one being global quality management systems. An example of that is the Medical Device Single Audit Program, MDSAP. Canada recently transitioned to MDSAP in January 2019. The transition was more challenging than other markets due to being the only model designed to base determinations on Class 2, 3, and 4 licenses on valid MDSAP certificates, and that makes the program mandatory to legally sell such devices in Canada. And some manufacturers canceled their medical device licenses and discontinued the sale of their products versus conforming to the new MDSAP requirements. And one of the reasons is that the audits are expected to cost more than ISO audits and take longer to conduct. In Brazil, they shared the status of MDSAP use and announced many proposed changes. And they have a regulation that will be revised to specify certification based on MDSAP. Another example of a global quality management system is ISO 13485. The most recent version is from 2016. Device manufacturers have to meet the requirements under the latest version of the standard by March 31st, 2019. The revised standard emphasized the risk-based approach to quality management throughout the product lifecycle. So the South Korean Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, MFDS, had a notice 2019-25, which was finalized, and it has requirements to align with ISO 13485, which was effective July 1st. And in India, there was an agreement to align QMS requirements with 13485, 2016. The publication of the EU MDR in 2017 and its subsequent years of transition period has been a big trend in the medical device community. 2019 was the last year for companies to transition to the regulation. Implementation is May 2020. This has had a huge impact for device firms that wanted to stay in the European market. They needed to invest the time and the manpower to evaluate their new requirements under the new regulation. We are also seeing simplified regulatory processes for low-risk medical devices. And we have a couple of examples. So for Brazil, they announced that Class 1 notification route effective May 1st, 2019. In Ecuador, there was a resolution for a simplified route for Class 1 and Class 2 devices with registration in a recognized country. Some of these recognized countries are the United States, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and the European Union. In Costa Rica, in September 2018, they established that Class 1 devices no longer required registration. And finally, we're just seeing a faster regulatory pace. As we discussed earlier, we have new regulations and ISO standards that are coming out or have come out in the recent past, and then FDA has released many new guidance documents. For example, in 2018, they released 65 new guidance documents, but in 2019, that number almost doubled. They issued 45 guidance documents in final form and 59 guidance documents in draft form. And as of February 17th of 2020, they had already released 2 final guidance documents and 3 draft guidance documents. This is a list of the references I used for this presentation. Your feedback is valuable for helping us improve future training sessions. Please take a moment to complete the survey. To receive a certificate of completion, please visit the following link. Thank you for your time. We look forward to hearing from you.